reporting of the company's triple bottom line. So welcome, Olivia.
Hey, good morning. So like she said, my name is Olivia Eskew. I am the Sustainability Coordinator at Cypress Creek Renewables. Prior to this, I was our Pollinator Project Coordinator, which was a self-induced title for about a year and a half. It was in coordination with my master's thesis that I finished up in May. And primarily what I was looking at was to vet through all of the upfront risks and associated costs with establishing pollinator habitat on solar farms across the United States. And so from that, the large portion of my job is still looking into pollinator habitat across our solar facilities, but also, as Iris mentioned, doing corporate social responsibility for Cypress Creek. So today, I'm clearly here to talk to you about our solar plus pollinator program. So we quickly abbreviated the term pollinator-friendly solar farms just to solar plus pollinator for the initiative because it was a mouthful. So today here, as all of us know, we're aware of the need for pollinator habitat at scale across the United States. Just to give a few pollinator-dependent crops for New York, which is where we have primarily focused to date, including apples, cherries, and peaches. These are some of the things that we look to highlight in any state that we are working on whenever we are entering a new town or local jurisdiction where we are trying to develop a solar farm. And I'll get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of that in just a moment. So again, to put it in perspective, this is just a snapshot of one of our state brochures. This is the national one. So in every single state that we are looking to develop solar farms in, we try to identify the direct economic benefit that pollinators provide for that state. So for example, to put it in context here, just one 2-megawatt solar farm can support pollinator habitat equivalent to 6,000 homes having a backyard garden, roughly a 6x12. So we're talking about quite a bit of pollinator habitat that we could be able to provide at scale. For any one of our solar facilities, they vary drastically in size, which also brings quite a bit of challenges, which I'll speak to here in a minute. So we are talking about anywhere from 10 or 20 acres with a community solar project to 14 or 1,500 acres at scale with some of our larger projects in the Northeast. Here. So this photo, I have to give credit to Rob Davis at Fresh Energy initially for providing this photo, but then I sent it over to our creative team and made it into a nice watercolor. So the species here that are represented are for our pollinator sites in the Northeast. We have recently committed, and I'll also get to this in a minute, 100% of our solar sites, in New York are pollinator friendly, which is really exciting because we have quite a bit of solar facilities coming that way. So this is another tool that we use just to kind of show the different species that we are using, whether it be within the array area or within what we call the buffer area. And that is another terminology that we kind of throw around a bit. So when I'm saying buffer, it just means the land area that is not covered by a panel, not necessarily the vegetative buffer. So in this image, again, this is just for the Northeast, but we have white Dutch clover, which we typically do end up using in the Northeast. We're having a little bit of trouble currently just trying to find some low-growing shade-tolerant species that are also within the minimum or the maximum height limit for our array area. For Cypress Creek solar facilities, we have on the minimum, so the lowest side of the panel is 24 inches, which is tough. To try to find shade-tolerant species, especially in the Northeast. We have found some more promising species and mixes in other ecoregions, but for the Northeast specifically, white Dutch clover has been the go-to for now. Okay, sorry, that green is very bright. So currently we have launched, this is pollinator habitat in the ground in 4 states across the United States. Texas, Maryland, Minnesota, and New York. We are actively looking at 8 other states currently this week. These are the other states that we are active in where we would like to end up deploying pollinator habitat at scale. Currently, we have 80 megawatts of pollinator habitat in the ground, which is roughly equivalent to 320,000 backyard gardens. Last week, I was just at the NAPSI conference with Pollinator Partnership, and we are putting these 320,000 backyard gardens to the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, if you're aware. So again, this is just to kind of show how we are grading our solar facilities to kind of keep it all together here. So as most of you probably know, the state scorecard was developed in Minnesota originally, and now many other states are also looking to develop or have developed a statewide scorecard. This allows us to assign a point value to any one of our solar farms. The goal is to also have these scorecards publicly available. And what I mean by that is it will be on our website when our first corporate social responsibility report gets published in December, if I can get it finished on time. And so that will be rolled out, and you can also be able to see where we're having pollinator habitat at scale and then what score we are associating with each one of our sites. We aim, based on the Minnesota scorecard and the New York one, I believe, as well. They're out of a score of 100 points. So for those, we aim for a minimum score of 90, which is tough, but it's also, we're doing it thus far. So this reaches an excellent habitat. In other states, the amount of points available isn't always 100 points. It can be more like 120 or 130. But again, we are trying to maintain that threshold of excellent habitat because as we are the developer in the room, it is also great to also be able to provide quality habitat and stand by your word for that. So roughly a year ago, in Baker Point was our first pollinator-friendly site in Thurmont, Maryland. And we went up there for the first ribbon cutting ceremony, and it was really a treat. You can see here in the middle are the landowners. They're actually, the land has been within their family for a few generations now. They're dairy farmers, and they were really excited to not only have clean energy brought to the land, but also to have pollinator habitat on that site. I will say we learned quite a bit from that first site and how to plant, how much pollinator habitat, where to place it on the site, and are making steps forward to create those best management practices. Come on. Oh, sorry, guys. So we do have 15 hives roughly on site. We have a little bee yard. And so the way it works moving forward for our solar facilities, as we are co-locating more and more hives on site, is we have an external fence that is not necessarily near the site entrance. And so it is literally a bee yard with its own fence and also has proper signage, not necessarily saying beware there are bees, because that's the last thing we want, but just to provide the appropriate public education and outreach that not only is it a pollinator-friendly solar farm, but hey, we are also hosting hives on site. And I will get to the safety concern in a moment. That is a big consideration for us. Apologies for the small text here. The main thing that we are also trying to communicate to towns and where I want to collaborate further with you all on is the best ways to get across educational materials around the type of IPM and other appropriate management practices that we are using. Just kind of hashing out further, we're not using pesticides. We are using these type of herbicides. We're using the appropriate management practices in place. So I won't harp on this for too long, but I'm happy to take questions. So again, this is something that I talked about when I finished up the first initial best practices guide that I put together. But to date, the scorecard has been extremely helpful from the developer side of things. It really does allow folks to assign one number value to a site and then kind of be able to track that over time. And so the way it generally works is we hire a third-party vegetation management group for the first 5 years of that solar facility. So for a solar farm, you're looking at roughly 30-year lifetime. And then we have a third-party vetted management expert on the ground doing not only the site preparation, the seed mix, the seeding, and then the veg management for the first 5 years. And with that, we're able to get a service guarantee with that veg management company. With that being said, this is where a lot of the site planning and management and monitoring and evaluation comes from, as we are a lot of times relying on that third party to assist with the scorecards and make sure that the habitat is being managed appropriately. So what's next? These are some of the questions that we wrestle with every day. The cost of native seeds. There's been a lot of leaps and bounds made, and it's really exciting as we're starting to vet through this across multiple markets. And in the grand scheme of things, the seed mix is not a deal breaker, the cost of it, when you're looking at the entire cost of building a solar facility. However, it's something really to consider, especially from an internal perspective when you're collaborating across teams. within the company and within the development side of things. And so one of the biggest things that I've learned is also having these communications up front and early on, at least a couple of growing seasons early with native seed suppliers, to make sure that we are having those conversations, that the seed supply will be there, just because of the scale that we are talking about, which is, to me, really exciting, but also keeps me up at night as well, just trying to figure out how much we can actually plant in what market and where, and keeping in mind the other questions like, what are the operational impacts of pollinators? So we really are fighting a battle with underneath the array areas of providing a really rich, diverse mix. And so that's where we try to get the more points and the more quality habitat outside of the array area as of now, is the way it stands for our operations. And the third question on here, which still gets me, we get the question a lot. Every time I walk into the office, folks ask if they're going to get stung. And it's a common concern that we still face. And one of the things that I'm struggling with currently is to adopt the appropriate language within our existing safety documents. So as a developer, we have an extensive external facing, safety documentation. You can find anything that you want really in there, but where can we insert the appropriate language that identifies what actually the risks are of having pollinator habitat on site? And even though the risk is, the percentage of getting stung is very minimal, we still have to include it, and making sure that that language is carried out. Another thing that I'd like to highlight, and something that was brought up at last week at NAPSI conference in coordination with Pollinator Partnership, is the need for educational materials. Flyers, brochures, like I said, we have I may have a few with me. We have just state one-pagers that shows, how this affects your area and the importance of pollinator habitat and giving all the benefits and things like that. But at the end of the day, when we are going to talk to any town or any local jurisdiction, we're still the developer in the room. And although myself, I love pollinators, I'm environmental background, folks don't know that. And so having that third-party certification and just type of, whether it's Xerxes or Pollinator Partnership or whoever, having that backing and support from other groups is really great to have. So with that, I will pause and take questions. Yeah, go for it.
Hi, yeah, I'm interested in more about the on-site beekeeping operations. Do you know, or can you provide a little bit more information on how those partnerships came about, if there's a partnership program or anything like that?
Absolutely. And I do have, they're at my little table, little jars of honey in case anybody wants some. Please take them because I don't want to deal with security again through the airport. So we actually made a mistake. Initially, our jars were over the 3-ounce limit, so they are 1.87 ounces now to get through security. So yeah, I can definitely speak to that. And also another just important high-level note for all of this is the legal factors to take in consideration. Now we have the templates and the agreements for beekeepers and just beekeeping in general in place, but that was definitely, it took about a year, right? And so now those are set in stone and we're able to move forward. So in terms of actual partnerships, like I mentioned earlier with Baker Point, on there. That was our first site, if it'll move for me, with hives on site. And those are the bee boxes there. However, as we are developing quite a bit at scale for pollinator habitat, we're looking to work with as many local beekeepers as we can for whatever town or county we may be in. So many times when we're at a town meeting, there will be the local beekeeping association or someone else, another pollinator expert in the room that will say, hey, we saw in the news Cypress Creek is doing pollinator habitat. We want that too. It happens more often than not now. And so the goal is to have hives on site while the folks owning the hives are the local beekeepers, or the folks that are managing it are those local beekeepers. And it is exciting. In the spring, we will be doing just that. We're working with a partner to serve as like the third-party liaison, if you will, to have local beekeepers on any one of our facilities in conjunction with the county that we are developing in. And so the way that works is the third party would own the hives, Cypress Creek would not, but the local beekeeper would be managing the hives, collecting the honey, et cetera, and then we would be able to jar the honey from there and work in that partnership.
So
Yes.
my quick question has to do with the height of the panels. I know there's some differences between like the fixed panels and then those that move, but why is 24 inches the magic number? Is there any reason that we can't just bump that up like another foot or 2 feet to allow?
I just had this conversation last week. So the conversations are being had, and I've had this question come up for about the past 1.5 or 2 years now. I think, and I am not on our finance team, so don't quote me here, but when Cypress Creek was founded, and that's another thing to note, Cypress Creek is only 4 years old, and we're the largest utility scale developer in the US, so we're just growing astronomically. When we were founded, if you will, I think that's financially what made sense. Economics, that's just the way it was, and since then, I think that is continued to this day to be what makes sense. However, now that we have, another thing I should note is my position as the sustainability coordinator, we don't have a sustainability team. So this is all very new and it's very exciting. And so anything to do with pollinator habitat, from the Pollinator Initiative, we have a ton of other sustainability initiatives and just new ideas being sparked. And so that is something that actually did come up recently as to, what are the potentials for raising the panels, whether that be for things like pollinator habitat or grazing, because we do have grazing on some of our facilities. We're trying to do native bee habitat in the perimeter areas. There's a lot of considerations. Yeah. Yeah, in the back. Sorry, you need a mic.
Curious about other uses on your land.
Okay.
Trails, maybe grassland, bird habitat. Do you try to promote anything in addition to pollinator habitat?
Absolutely. So we are, and I just had this conversation earlier, we are looking into bird and bat habitat on our solar facilities as well as grazing, and then not just focusing on honeybee health, but also native pollinators in general. So I just got a proposal, approved about 2 weeks ago, which is exciting, to start doing native bee habitat on our sites. Grazing, in terms of trails, I haven't. I don't see why not, but that is not something that's come across my desk as of yet.
Have you thought of anything like conservation banking, multiple species?
I have not, but I would love to learn more about it. We can chat about it.
Great. One last question.
I was just curious if you've gotten to the point in your scorecard where you can differentiate you're raising honeybees or hosting honeybees, and then you're trying to measure the benefits for native bees. And so how does that happen?
Absolutely. So there is, and I'm working with a few different states currently that have these draft scorecards out that aren't finalized with the State Department yet. And essentially what it looks like to date, and generically speaking here, you can get +2 or 3 points. So not a lot, but having something like native bee habitat on site versus actual honeybee hives co-located. Other small point allocations are like educational science on site. So things like that, where it's just small added things on that scorecard we can get the points for. The large portion of the points on the scorecard come from blooming seasons, native species, number of them, diversity, percentage of site covered. One thing I will say, and I'm glad that I was able to speak with some groups about this, is giving the perspective of scale from the solar industry side of the utility scale. Because, for example, one draft I was looking over, it was 0 to 25% of the site covered with native species got 0 points. And I was like, wait a second. So if you're telling me if I have 1,000 acres and 250 of them have native species, we get 0 points for 250, so it's making sure that we also bring in all perspectives to those scorecards, which it depends on the state too. A lot of states are much more community solar based, whereas in New York, we're dealing with massive plots of land. Yeah, sorry. I don't know if I can keep talking.
Well, last question.
Habitat for honeybees versus native bees. Are you talking about them being on different sites or the same site, number one? And also, there's a lot less risk of stinging and that kind of exposure.
Exactly.
If the habitat is being scored for native bees instead of honeybees.
Absolutely. And that's why that native bee proposal went through so quickly, is because I said, hey, these guys aren't going to sting you. And so that's something that I brought up to the team. The native bee proposal is very new, but that's something that I brought up, in that we want to make sure that the seed mixes that we are using on site, where we're proposing native bee habitat, actually support native bees, versus whereas on site sites where we are generally just focused on honeybees, that we have that honeybee mix. If we are doing native bee habitat on site, making sure that the native bee mix is in close proximity to where those houses are being, the native bee habitat is being built.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Olivia.
And please come get some honey so I don't have to take it home.